What if I told you that fungi helped make soil before forests ever existed, or that tiny tardigrades managed to survive every major extinction in surprising ways, and we'll explain how? Recent research even suggests the last universal common ancestor may have been alive 4.2 billion years ago, and parts of the Cambrian explosion started earlier than we thought. This is the 2025 Science Edition, based on the latest findings. In just over an hour, we'll shrink 4.5 billion years of Earth's history into seconds, with every flash marking millions of years of transformation. You'll see volcanic worlds, vanished oceans, and creatures stranger than fiction, all part of the epic chain that eventually produced us. But before any of that could exist, Earth itself had to come into being, and its arrival was anything but peaceful. A violent birth and a stolen moon. Imagine the world first coming together in a storm of collisions, where dust, rock, and entire planets in waiting smashed into one another. Among these encounters, one stands out. A body roughly the size of Mars, now named Theia, struck the young Earth in a collision so massive that it likely vaporized huge amounts of rock and atmosphere and hurled debris into orbit. Out of that orbiting rubble, the moon began to form. The scar overhead that regulates tides and calms Earth's tilt was born from that single catastrophic event. A fragment of Earth remade into a permanent companion. For hundreds of millions of years afterward, the planet remained unstable. Its surface was a restless ocean of lava, with crust hardening only to collapse again as heat escaped from within. We are now in the Hadean Eon, stretching from about 4.5 to 4 billion years ago, a span that lived up to its name. This was a world of fire, bombardment, and short-lived atmospheres stripped again and again by fresh impacts. To anyone looking on, it would have been an endless cycle of surfaces forming, shattering, and vanishing beneath liquid rock. The young solar system was far more hostile than today. The early inner planets endured frequent large collisions, with asteroids tens to hundreds of kilometers across plummeting down in waves. Each strike remodeled Earth's crust, sometimes liquefying vast regions, sometimes boiling away what water had managed to collect on the surface. Debris stirred into orbit returned in firestorms, flaring across the sky. Still, even within this turmoil, small steps toward stability began to emerge. The moon, just freshly formed, loomed enormous in the sky and hovered much closer to Earth than now. Its gravitational pull dragged tides across molten seas and amplified volcanism inside the planet. With Earth spinning far faster, its days lasting only a few hours, the combined effect of rapid rotation and heavy tidal forces drove relentless internal motion. Though it was far from a habitable planet, these forces were already helping the surface shed heat more quickly, setting the stage for cooler crust to persist. At around 4.3 billion years ago, a curious record appeared, tiny crystals of zircon durable enough to survive until today. These zircons reveal chemical signatures showing that liquid water had pooled on the surface, even under such hostile conditions. They are direct, tangible markers, the oldest known evidence that rain fell, steamed away, and pooled again on magma fields until small but lasting bodies of water formed. Early oceans may have existed long before anyone imagined, even if they were not like the stable seas we know now. That water was never secure. Plant-sized impacts continued to strip oceans away, vaporizing surface reservoirs into the atmosphere in destructive waves. Some of that water escaped outright into space, but much condensed and rained back over spans of thousands of years. The Earth entered a rhythm of loss and renewal, gaining minerals each time as impacts crushed surface rocks and exposed fresh materials to chemical weathering. In this endless repetition, the surface of Earth was quietly becoming more enriched, its chemistry nudged toward complexity. Recent models suggest the Theia impact did more than just launch the moon. It fundamentally scrambled Earth's internal structure, turning heavy and light elements together and possibly speeding the formation of the core. That acceleration may have generated the magnetic field that has shielded Earth ever since, deflecting solar radiation and preserving the nascent atmosphere. Without such a field, the planet might have suffered Mars's fate, stripped bare, its water chased away by the sun's wind. Seen that way, a catastrophic collision was also a critical safeguard, securing conditions needed for any future life. Still, time stretched on. Hundreds of millions of years ticked by as the Earth tried to keep a stable surface. Small fragments of solid crust began to persist, emerging like temporary rafts in the flames. They weren't continents, not yet, but slabs of cooling rock, some collecting rain instead of losing it instantly to steam. Together with minerals leached from inside the planet and gases from the atmosphere above, they created enclosed places where chemistry could grow more intricate, places increasingly different from the world outside. Impacts from space kept delivering new ingredients. Some asteroids contained water locked deep inside, released only when they smashed into the crust. Others carried carbon-rich compounds, simple but essential. Every collision added to the chemical stockpile, tossing ingredients into Earth's evolving surface waters. By the end of the Hadean, what seemed like devastation had produced an improbable combination: liquid water, protective shielding, and a stabilizing moon. All had emerged not in spite of violence, but because of it. So the impact that once split Earth and created its satellite also forged the conditions for oceans to appear around 4.3 billion years ago. These oceans reflected a dimmer sun, with the moon still looming vastly larger overhead. They were not yet alive. They were dark, mineral-rich expanses lying over a hostile, restless planet. But that alone was enough to redirect Earth's future, allowing chemistry a chance to explore possibilities never seen before. And in those waters, the next transformation was already quietly preparing to begin. The dawn of life, microbes take the stage. What followed was not the rise of continents or forests, but the quiet emergence of life itself, microscopic, ancient, and almost unrecognizable by modern standards. This was the true dawn of biology, when the earliest microbial communities began shaping a world that still looked utterly alien. One prevailing idea asks us to picture life beginning not in sunlight but in the deep ocean around hydrothermal vents. Here, black chimneys of volcanic rock spewed mineral-rich water heated far above the boiling point, kept liquid only by the crushing pressure of kilometers of seawater. In these environments, temperature gradients and chemical disequilibria offered energy for reactions. Laboratory studies and computer modeling have shown that in such systems, organic molecules can form, concentrate, and grow more complex. If early life had a birthplace, vents remain one of the most plausible candidates. Recent research pushes the timing of such beginnings further back than long assumed. Genetic studies in 2024 and 2025 suggest that the last universal common ancestor, LUCA, may date to nearly 4.2 billion years ago, while isotopic traces in some ancient rocks also hint at early metabolism between 4 and 4.2 billion. These signals are still debated and difficult to interpret, but the trend is clear. Life may have appeared surprisingly soon after Earth had liquid water. If correct, life did not wait for stable continents or an oxygen-rich sky. It appears to have started well before either existed, with early metabolisms exploiting chemistry rather than sunlight. These first oceans were nothing like the blue seas of today. They were acidic and heavily mineralized, crowded with iron dissolved from volcanic rocks, giving them a murky green hue under the dim glow of the young sun. Carbon dioxide thickened the skies, while methane and hydrogen sulfide drifted through dark hazes. For modern organisms, such a setting would be toxic, but microbes at the origins of life required no oxygen, no breathable air. In fact, high oxygen at that time might have been destructive, disrupting fragile prebiotic chemistry before it stabilized. The absence of oxygen, paradoxically, was an advantage. The boundary between non-living chemistry and life is difficult to define in this period. What likely existed first were networks of molecules that could copy themselves imperfectly, leaving behind variations. Compartments may have formed in pore spaces of rocks or within the micropockets of mineral formations, allowing concentration, shelter, and repeated reactions. Over countless iterations, some systems began stabilizing and became what we would now recognize as microbial ancestors, entities able to persist, reproduce, and use environmental energy to drive their cycles. Direct fossils from this time do not exist. Instead, scientists rely on isotopic fingerprints preserved in the oldest rocks. Subtle shifts in carbon ratios hint at early carbon fixation, while sulfur isotope anomalies point toward primitive metabolisms. Some rocks in Greenland and Australia record evidence older than 3.8 billion years and possibly older still. These traces are faint and often contested, but together they suggest that once Earth had persistent water, lifelike processes followed quickly. Conditions at the surface were still punishing. Without an ozone layer, ultraviolet radiation battered exposed areas. Meteorite impacts could sterilize large regions or even briefly vaporize shallow oceans. Yet life persisted by retreating into protective environments beneath the surface in fissures deep in vent systems or within porous minerals. These hidden niches provided stability even as the larger environment swung between extremes. At this microscopic scale, chemistry had continuity, giving life a chance to endure every disruption. Among the most remarkable innovations of these early times was the gradual acquisition of photosynthesis. Primitive forms may not have split water or released oxygen, but instead drew power from infrared light or used simpler molecules as donors in chemical reactions. Over many millions of years, however, certain microbes developed pigments to capture more of the sun's light. A lineage of them, Cyanobacteria, eventually cracked the challenge of using water as an electron donor, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. The rise of Cyanobacteria was not immediate or exclusive. For vast spans, they coexisted alongside groups of archaea and bacteria that thrived without oxygen, living from hydrogen, methane, or sulfur chemistry. To the casual eye, the surface world would have seemed barren, dotted only by volcanic outcrops and small islands. Yet beneath thin coastal seas, cyanobacteria spread in dense layered mats, capturing sunlight and building thick, domed structures with mineral grains. These are stromatolites, visible collaborations of countless microbes, preserved in rock layers still visible today, and among the oldest lasting evidence that life once covered Earth. Microbes during this early period became astonishingly resilient. Different lineages evolved enzymes to protect against acid, heat, or salt. Some created resting stages, shutting down into durable forms that could wait out hostile conditions. Others enclosed themselves within protective casings that resisted radiation. Collectively, these strategies allowed survival through impacts, volcanism, and fluctuations in the planet's chemistry. Even now, extremophiles on modern Earth, living in boiling springs, acid lakes, or frozen deserts, carry echoes of these ancient adaptations. By roughly 3.5 billion years ago, Earth had transitioned from sterile rock and toxic oceans into a microbial planet. The hidden work of these communities altered their surroundings molecule by molecule. Cyanobacteria in particular had begun releasing oxygen into the seas, though for hundreds of millions of years that oxygen immediately bonded with iron and sulfur, vanishing before reaching the skies. Only once these sinks were saturated would oxygen finally build in the atmosphere, but that moment was still far ahead. Still, the groundwork was already laid. Invisible processes were reshaping the chemistry of oceans and air, slow but steady. The world remained hostile to anything larger than microbes, yet those microbes exerted planetary influence, setting in motion the processes that would soon change climate, geology, and the global balance of gases. In their persistence, generation after generation, the first great transformation of Earth had begun, quiet, microscopic, but unavoidable. The pace of change would accelerate. Altered gases would amplify reactions in the atmosphere, changing how heat was trapped and released. What started in the dim seas around vent systems was expanding to scales that encompassed air, sky, and climate. The story of microbes, once confined to sheltered niches, was about to spill outward and reshape Earth as a whole. The oxygen revolution and Earth's first freeze. Earth once existed beneath a blanket of methane and carbon-rich haze that trapped heat, keeping the seas liquid under a sun that shone far weaker than today. For hundreds of millions of years, this balance sustained microbial mats in coastlines and shallow oceans. Then a process began that changed everything. Colonies of cyanobacteria, quietly photosynthesizing in stromatolites, released waste into their surroundings, not carbon dioxide this time, but oxygen. At first, this oxygen left no trace in the sky. It reacted with metals dissolved in water, especially abundant iron. Oceans turned rusty red as oxygen bonded into minerals that fell to the seafloor. These alternating deposits of oxidized and reduced material, still visible today as banded iron formations, document a hidden story. Oxygen was being produced, but every molecule was locked away before it could transform the air above. Eventually, after millions of years, those chemical sinks filled. Iron precipitation slowed, sulfur compounds met their limits, and free oxygen began to persist. Between 2.4 and 2.3 billion years ago, atmospheric levels crossed a tipping point. The event is now called the Great Oxidation Event. Its pace was not sudden, unfolding over tens of millions of years, but the implications were profound. Methane, Earth's most efficient greenhouse gas at the time, was destroyed by oxygen, replaced by carbon dioxide, a weaker blanket against the cold. With less heat trapped, planetary temperatures began to drop. For microbes adapted to chemical environments without oxygen, this new gas was not a gift, it was toxic. Oxygen damaged existing metabolisms and favored lineages that could tolerate it. Cellular molecules oxidized, DNA broke apart, membranes destabilized. Microbial populations dwindled or sought protection in anoxic sediments beneath rocks in the deep sea, anywhere oxygen had little reach. Meanwhile, slowly evolving enzymes to neutralize reactive oxygen allowed some organisms not just to survive, but eventually to thrive. Biology had met its first self-inflicted extinction crisis, one that restructured ecosystems at the smallest scale. The loss of methane warmed balance only amplified hardships. With weaker greenhouse protection under a still dim sun, ice began its advance. Glaciers crept from poles and high ground across continents, expanding outward year after year. Temperatures plunged until the oceans themselves froze over. Geological records suggest the planet descended into a near-global glaciation, one of Earth's first Snowball Earth episodes. Seen from orbit, the surface would have been stark and white, clouds swirling over thick ice stretching toward the equator. Life was forced to retreat into refuges. Hydrothermal vents at mid-ocean ridges provided heat and chemicals, sustaining chemosynthetic microbes visible nowhere on the frozen surface. Briny layers of water, kept liquid by salt beneath the ice, likely harbored communities as well. Volcanic outcrops may have punctured through expanding glaciers, forming thin, warm zones. Cracks within ice sheets allowed faint light to trickle enough for limited photosynthesis. Spores capable of resting in extreme cold waited out the harsher intervals. Models in geology suggest these glaciations lasted millions of years, during which life clung to such protective environments in reduced but persistent form. The precise span remains debated, though isotopic evidence in ancient rocks shows disruptions in carbon cycles consistent with a global freeze. Dust from dry land blew across glaciers, while subglacial volcanism trapped gases that later leaked back into the atmosphere. During these long millennia, biological evolution did not stop, but it slowed under extreme stress, favoring the few strategies that offered resilience. Relief came through the steady work of volcanoes. Even under ice, eruptions continued and carbon dioxide accumulated in the atmosphere because nothing, no plants, no vast oceans was drawing it back down. Over millions of years, that reservoir thickened. Eventually, greenhouse warming overwhelmed the reflectivity of the frozen sphere. When the tipping point was finally reached, glaciers retreated rapidly, oceans thawed. Meltwater cascaded into basins and fresh nutrients from weathered, dust-fertilized seas. Whole ecosystems revived, and surviving lineages spread into freed habitats. The aftermath of the thaw was as consequential as the freeze itself. Populations refined by survival pressures had adapted to oxygen tolerance, and for the first time, oxygen metabolism became advantageous rather than lethal. Cells capable of harnessing oxygen could capture vastly more energy, powering larger size and greater complexity. A toxic byproduct had been redefined into a biological tool. From this turning point onward, the atmosphere never returned to a fully anoxic state. Oxygen levels fluctuated but trended upward, laying down the foundation upon which more elaborate metabolisms would later build. The Great Oxidation event was not simply a chemical reshuffling, it was a restructuring of possibility. It enabled the energetic capacities that multicellular organisms would one day require. This first snowball Earth must also be seen against the background of geological record. Rocks scratched by once advancing glaciers, deposits of unusual carbon isotopes, all are fingerprints of global-scale change driven in large part by biology itself. Tiny microbes, through oxygen release, initiated a chain reaction that altered climate, carved marks into bedrock, and forced the planet into cycles of collapse and recovery. The power of life to redirect planetary systems was being written in evidence that persists billions of years later. The Earth would not experience its most dramatic global freezes again until the Cryogenian period, between 720 and 635 million years ago. During those later episodes, ice again extended nearly worldwide, testing survival strategies a second time. Each cycle brought extinctions but also mutations, shaping gene pools that could navigate extremes. Importantly, the survivors and the geochemical aftermath of these freezes set the stage for the eventual rise of animals in the Cambrian period. These events also underscored a new theme. Life in Earth's environment could no longer be separated. Biology influenced atmosphere and climate, which in turn shaped the course of evolution. After oxygen accumulation and the freezing episodes it triggered, the future of the planet had entered a feedback loop between living systems and planetary systems, one that defined the rest of Earth's story. Out of the ice ages, oxygenated seas, and forged survivors, the ground was now ready for even stranger changes. Soon, the processes inside rocks and deep beneath the landscape would set off developments as surprising as any microbial innovation. Supercontinents and strange nuclear reactors. Did you know that Earth once ran its own nuclear reactor? Long before humans ever built machines to split atoms, natural conditions allowed such a process to occur on their own. About 2 billion years ago, in what is now Oklo, Gabon, uranium-rich deposits sat locked in sandstone layers. With the right proportions of uranium isotopes in the steady seep of groundwater, the rock formations themselves produced cycles of self-sustaining nuclear fission, essentially functioning as natural reactors. As water flowed in, it slowed neutrons enough to keep the chain reaction stable. When the water boiled away, reactions paused until new groundwater filtered back. This stop-and-start cycle repeated over hundreds of thousands of years, releasing heat not as explosions but as a steady rhythm of energy. Evidence of these reactions survives in the isotopes of the surrounding rocks. Unusual ratios of certain elements compared to anywhere else on Earth confirm that nuclear processes occurred naturally inside those deposits. At least a dozen discrete reactor zones once operated this way beneath Oklo. The system was in perfect balance: uranium fuel, natural moderation by groundwater, and cycles of heating and cooling that continued until the supply was exhausted. Some scientists suggest that the local heat and chemical reactions may have created favorable conditions for microbes underground, though evidence is limited and remains speculative. What is clear is that physics itself, unaided by any machinery, sustained a nuclear process for immense stretches of time. While natural reactors quietly pulsed below ground, the surface of the Earth was undergoing transformations of an entirely different scale. The planet's crust was shifting, colliding, and welding pieces of land together into one of the earliest supercontinents. Between about 1.8 and 1.6 billion years ago, massive continental blocks assembled into a single vast landmass known as Columbia or Nuna. Unlike the recognizable shapes of modern continents, these cratons were irregular fragments, crust that had survived the violent early Earth, pushed and stitched together by tectonic motion. The creation of Columbia set off far-reaching consequences. Mountain ranges rose where fragments collided, altering weather patterns and sending torrents of fresh minerals down into the seas. New basins changed how water circulated, redirecting currents and reshaping shallow continental shelves. In these coastal margins, where light, nutrients, and chemistry mixed, microbial life colonized extensively. The merging of continents did not simply reshape geography, it also shifted the balance of resources that life depended upon. Tectonic collisions recycled and buried sediments, driving volcanism along fault zones. Each eruption belched gases and enriched the oceans with more trace elements. Fresh weathering of uplifted rock surfaces pulled carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, a process that cooled the climate but stabilized it over long timescales. Silicate weathering carried carbon out to sea floors, locking it in carbonates, while volcanic activity returned portions of it to the air. This cycle acted as a thermostat, balancing conditions while maintaining temperate oceans suitable for more resilient ecosystems. These more stable environments supported key evolutionary thresholds. Around this time, a new class of organism appeared: eukaryotes. Unlike bacteria or archaea, these cells contained compartments, nuclei to protect genetic material, and organelles to manage energy. Their structure allowed far larger cell size, the storage of longer strands of DNA, and more varied metabolisms. Fossil evidence reveals relatively large microfossils in rocks laid down near this era, some visible to the naked eye. They mark the rise of complexity beyond what had defined life for billions of years. The timing of eukaryote evolution may not be accidental. As Columbia rose, erosion released trace elements, iron, zinc, copper, and others essential to enzymes and cellular machinery, into seas in greater concentrations. These nutrients acted as enabling tools for more intricate biochemistry. Oxygen, creeping upward in concentration though still far below modern levels, offered entirely new energy pathways. Within this backdrop of chemical opportunity, cells equipped with internal compartments could take advantage of higher energy yields. Complexity did not emerge in isolation. It was tied to the very rhythms of tectonics and surface chemistry. The contrast between phenomena operating at vastly different scales, the atomic chain reactions at Oklo and the global rearrangements of Columbia, is striking. Both were governed by the unyielding rules of physics and geology, and both affected the planet's capacity to host life. One showed that natural nuclear balance could be achieved beneath the surface. The other demonstrated that slow but relentless tectonic cycles could rearrange the surface world. Together, they defined a period where environments enriched by geology gave biology a platform to experiment with new strategies and greater complexity. Columbia, like all supercontinents after it, was not permanent. Over hundreds of millions of years, cracks opened along its seams, fragments pulled apart, and new oceans widened between them. Later cycles would see new supercontinents emerge, only to break again. Each cycle changed circulation patterns of oceans, exposed new lands to weathering, and reshaped climates. For life, these transformations provided repeated pulses of novelty: new coastlines, new shallow seas, and new ways of distributing nutrients. Microbes adapted to these changing conditions across great spans of time. Some began experimenting with new ways of exchanging genetic material, a departure from the simple division that had defined reproduction before. Others shifted toward predatory and defensive strategies, no longer content to rely solely on chemical gradients or sunlight. These shifts marked a change in how evolution unfolded. No longer was it only geology, chemistry, or atmospheric gases that drove direction. Now, organisms themselves were beginning to pressure one another into new forms and strategies. By the close of this era, Earth remained a microbial planet, but its inhabitants had diversified in structure and behavior. Larger cells, compartmentalized internals, and early signs of genetic exchange hinted at future revolutions. The oceans were no longer home only to passive colonies and chemical scavengers. Some lineages were already testing innovations that would alter the evolutionary landscape irreversibly. Those changes set the stage for the next breakthrough: strategies that would rearrange reproduction, competition, and survival in ways no geological cycle ever had. Sex armor and the first predator wars. Billions of years before dinosaurs or mammals left their mark, microscopic organisms stumbled onto an innovation that completely reshaped evolutionary possibilities: sexual reproduction. Until then, nearly every lineage replicated through simple division. One cell became two, identical except for errors introduced by chance. That sort of copying was efficient but limited. Asexual populations changed only slowly, most mutations being detrimental. Then sex appeared and everything accelerated. Sexual reproduction allowed two individuals to combine genetic material, mixing traits with each pairing. Variation increased dramatically, and with it the opportunity for natural selection to work far more effectively. Fossils like Bangiomorpha**, dating to about 1.2 billion years ago, provide the earliest fossil evidence of this process. The preserved filaments of this early red alga show structures consistent with sexual reproduction, hinting that entire cellular lineages were already experimenting with ways to shuffle genes. Once this mechanism became established, evolution gained a new tempo. Recombinant populations could produce countless genetic combinations in every generation. Many were less successful, but some gave organisms a significant edge. Advantages spread rapidly. Populations recovering from environmental shifts could rebound with greater diversity, while pathogens or competitors faced a constantly shifting target. In effect, whole ecosystems began evolving faster. But sexual reproduction also carried another unintended consequence. It provided raw material for new forms of ecological interaction. Some microbes, enlarged by eukaryotic complexity, moved beyond scavenging and began targeting living cells directly. They engulfed, digested, and survived on the tissues of others. Life itself became a primary source of danger as the planet entered the first predator-prey arms races. Those races intensified across millions of years. Early predator cells developed appendages that allowed them to swim faster through microbial mats or extend pseudopodia to pull prey inside. In response, prey evolved countermeasures. Some grew tougher cell walls, others deposited minerals into their outer layers, turning themselves into armored spheres and ellipsoids that resisted digestion. Under a microscope today, those defenses appear as intricately sculpted shells, ridged, spiked, or layered, each designed to make a predator hesitate or fail. Even colonies organized themselves into filaments and clusters, their combined size offering protection against individual hunters. Evolution was becoming cyclical. One adaptation was answered by another, responses escalating in alternating turns. The fossil record preserves glimpses of these long battles. Microfossils from this interval sometimes show conspicuously thickened walls, evidence of lineages investing significant energy in self-defense. Stromatolitic layers reveal collective forms, microbial communities arranged in mats that may have resisted ravaging predators by sheer density. Later records, closer to the dawn of animals, preserve direct traces of predator pressure. Shell borings in organisms such as *Cloudna* show that drilling, puncturing, and consumption had become widespread strategies before and during the Cambrian explosion. These early markers confirm that the interaction between predator and prey was already well established long before larger, visible organisms dominated the seas. Sex only deepened the escalation. Mixing genes meant both sides in this contest could innovate faster. A successful defensive mutation could combine across populations, rapidly stabilizing against attack. Meanwhile, predators benefited from new abilities to maneuver or secrete stronger enzymes. This exchange created an evolutionary cycle where biology itself, not just climate or geology, became the selective landscape. Sex multiplied genetic options while predation selected for armor, mobility, and new body plans, a double push toward complexity. The consequences rippled outward. Microscopic though the players were, these dynamics shaped ecosystems as fundamentally as later forests or coral reefs would. In nutrient-rich coastal waters, armored cells clustered in mats resistant to predation. Those groups altered sedimentation, leaving faint yet cumulative signs in layered rocks. Elsewhere, drifting plankton, targeted by motile predators, drove shifts in water chemistry and recycling of organic matter. Each interaction, predator consuming prey, prey resisting capture, echoed at planetary scales despite occurring unseen. Survival strategies diversified. Some microbes secreted toxins, turning themselves into hazardous meals that poisoned would-be hunters. Others developed motility themselves, evolving flagella that allowed rapid withdrawal from approaching predators. Colonies expanded, individuals cooperating in chains or sheets too large to be consumed whole. These strategies persist even today. Biofilms, toxic algae, armored plankton, all carry echoes of adaptations first established in Precambrian seas. The principles were simple but effective. Build defenses, hunt more efficiently, or join together for protection. At the same time, environmental changes pressed hard against life. Oxygen had not yet stabilized at consistently high levels. Local areas could swing between oxic and anoxic states, forcing constant biochemical adjustments. Volcanism and tectonics shifted shorelines, opening and closing shallow water habitats. In this unstable world, lineages reproducing sexually had greater latitude to respond. Populations tied exclusively to simple asexual division could be wiped out by abrupt shifts, whereas sexually reproducing lineages had more room for genetic recombination and resilience. It is striking that these transformative processes occurred at a microscopic scale invisible to the naked eye. Yet from their invisible contests emerged principles that would eventually define every ecosystem: reproductive diversity, predator-prey escalation, defensive strategies, cooperation, and mobility. This era crystallized the interdependence between organisms, the fact that one species' innovation imposed burdens on others and forced reciprocal invention. No longer did life evolve merely in response to shifting chemistry or gradual climate. By now, the life world itself was setting the stage. Still, these innovations did not immediately produce large, complex organisms. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth remained dominated by unicellular and colonial life. But by crossing from passive chemical existence into active predator-prey relationships, those organisms lifted evolution into a new state. Arms races ensured that change could not stop. Each lineage existed in constant contest with competitors it could neither ignore nor eliminate. In these pressures lay the seeds of major biological transformations yet to come. As tectonics slowly shifted landmasses and nutrient flows, these microscopic struggles continued unchecked, reforming ecosystems with every geological rearrangement. From above, the planet might have looked barren, its shorelines quiet and its oceans apparently lifeless. But beneath, a relentless cycle of consumption, resistance, and genetic recombination pressed steadily onward, preparing cellular life for further leaps. By the close of this interval, Earth's biosphere was fundamentally different than at its origin. Cells bore shells, toxins, or motility features unthinkable in earlier epochs. Genetic exchange through sex had become established, ensuring future lineages an expanded horizon of possibilities. Predation was no longer an isolated experiment, but a universal force shaping nearly every organism. These developments laid the groundwork for biological resilience that would prove critical in episodes still to come. Mass glaciations and planetary upheavals were on the horizon. To endure them, life needed flexibility, variation, and the capacity to withstand crisis. The innovations born in this age of sexual reproduction and early predator-prey escalation gave life those exact tools, advantages that would soon be tested against forces far more severe than hungry neighbors in the sea. Snowball returns, survival against the odds. Earth's harshest deep freeze did not happen just once. Between about 720 and 635 million years ago, the planet slipped into at least two intervals of near-global glaciation, when glaciers advanced all the way to the equator and oceans disappeared beneath kilometers of ice. This stretch of time is called the Cryogenian, and in terms of climate, it ranks among the most extreme episodes Earth has ever experienced. From afar, the surface would have looked less like a blue planet, and more like a reflective, frozen sphere drifting in orbit around the sun. Evidence of these snowball Earth states comes from glacial deposits found in ancient rocks that once lay in the tropics. Striations gouged into bedrock, clasts carried by ice and dropped into marine sediments, and chemical markers that only occur under freezing conditions point to ice advancing far beyond polar regions. The conclusion is unavoidable. Continents once covered in tundra stretched down into what were then warm latitudes, and shallow seas froze under thick lids of ice. Such conditions seem hostile to life almost by definition. With ocean surfaces sealed off, light could barely penetrate and photosynthesis at the surface must have collapsed. Nutrient cycling would have been choked by ice cover, and temperatures plummeted to levels that might sterilize any exposed habitat. Yet recovery after each glaciation proves that life did not stop. Microbes and ecosystems endured, which means refuges existed, pockets where energy and liquid water persisted despite the grip of global cold. One of the clearest refuges is hydrothermal vents. Even beneath a crust of ice, Earth's interior heat never ceased to leak outward. Along mid-ocean ridges, black smokers expelled hot mineral-laden fluids. Around them, steep chemical and thermal gradients could support chemoautotrophs able to live without sunlight. These vent environments would have been isolated, but stable enough for microbial communities to continue, feeding off sulfur or hydrogen rather than light. They remain one of the strongest candidates for where life survived during full glaciations. Subglacial lakes offer another plausible refuge. Thick ice is not uniformly solid. Geothermal heat, pressure, and salt content can create briny pools trapped below the ice cover. Today in Antarctica, subglacial lakes such as Lake Vostok and Lake Whillans remain liquid under several kilometers of ice, and modern microbial life has been documented deep within them. Ancient equivalents almost certainly existed during Cryogenian glaciations. These liquid reservoirs would have provided stable, shielded environments where microbial colonies could persist for thousands or millions of years. The ice itself may have also contained thin or broken zones. Volcanic regions, rift valleys, or geothermal hotspots could have melted surface pockets or kept ice thinner, allowing some light to filter through. Photosynthetic microbes adapted for low light could have exploited these microenvironments, anchoring fragile food webs. At the same time, fractures in the ice would have allowed trace gas exchange between atmosphere and ocean, which was critical for maintaining geochemical balance. Without such pathways, volcanic gases could not accumulate to levels capable of triggering eventual thaw. Beyond physical refugia, many microorganisms likely relied on biological strategies for endurance. Dormancy offered a way to withstand conditions when active growth was impossible. Spores, cysts, and resistant resting stages protected cells from freezing damage and nutrient deprivation. Laboratory studies confirm that spores can survive for astonishingly long times, even under vacuum or radiation. Some extremophiles today, such as hardy microbes and tardigrades, survive through desiccation or metabolic shutdown. While tardigrades themselves appeared much later, the same functional strategies, resisting water loss, enduring suspension of activity, were likely present in microbial lineages more than 600 million years ago. All of this emphasizes that Cryogenian life did not persist in abundance or in open oceans, but in scattered, constrained niches. Populations shrank as most habitats vanished, creating what researchers describe as a bottleneck for Earth's biosphere. Yet bottlenecks do not eliminate life entirely, they compress it into resilient, adaptable forms. The survivors carried forward robust strategies that prepared them for future opportunities once conditions improved. Those improvements came through slow but inevitable greenhouse forcing. Under a planet crusted with ice, processes that normally draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, such as silicate weathering, were shut down. Volcanoes, however, continued steady emissions into the air. Over millions of years, carbon dioxide accumulated without interruption until greenhouse warming finally outpaced the high reflectivity of global ice cover. The transition was abrupt on geological timescales. Once melting began, feedbacks accelerated the thaw, and glaciers retreated in only thousands of years. The aftermath of the thaw left its own geological record. Cap carbonates, thick bands of carbonate deposits, formed rapidly in shallow seas, showing how greatly ocean chemistry shifted as ice sheets dumped fresh water and volcanic carbon dioxide drove intense precipitation of minerals. Nutrients flushed from weathered continents surged into rejuvenated oceans, and oxygen increased locally in the water column. These ingredients created fertile grounds for ecosystems that were radically different from those before the freeze. Not all organisms made it through. Many lineages were lost forever in the cold silence of the Cryogenian. Those that persisted were organisms equipped with resilience, cells able to survive and vent ecosystems, microbes encased in dormant stages, lineages adapted to endure under low light, low nutrient stress. What remained after the ice retreated was a narrower but hardier biosphere. This selective pressure reshaped the entire trajectory of evolution by emphasizing durability and adaptability. When ice finally relinquished its hold about 635 million years ago, the stage was set for change. New nutrient cycles pumped energy through ecosystems faster than before. Higher oxygen levels enabled larger, more complex organisms to take advantage of aerobic metabolism. The bottleneck had winnowed diversity but cleared ecological space, opening opportunities that life had never explored. The Ediacaran period followed, marked by the first large multicellular forms populating the seas. Sheets, fronds, and quilt-like organisms spread across seafloors, precursors of animals that owed their chance to the endurance of microscopic ancestors during frozen ages. Fossils from this time are strange and enigmatic, but they demonstrate that complex multicellularity had arrived. From the long silence of Earth's frozen intervals came a readiness for innovation. The Cryogenian proved that life could withstand global catastrophic climates, even when oceans froze nearly solid. It also set up conditions that favored experimentation once warmth returned. Dormancy, vent survival, and subglacial refuges were the tactics that carried lineages through, but the aftermath was what reshaped the future, creating the conditions under which new organisms would emerge. In this sense, Cryogenian survival was not just endurance, it was preparation. Resilient microbes rebuilt ecosystems in revitalized seas, carbon cycling resumed at higher intensity, and oxygenation pushed forward again. The planetary stage that followed looked very different from the one before the freeze. And it is against that new backdrop that the next great transformation appeared, when life surprised the Earth once more with organisms unlike anything that had existed before. The Cambrian explosion, alien worlds in the sea. In the early Paleozoic seas, something unprecedented unfolded. Around 540 million years ago, the Cambrian period began, and the fossil record reveals a rush of innovations so dramatic that it is often called the Cambrian explosion. For billions of years, oceans had been dominated by microbial mats and a few soft-bodied organisms. Then, in what amounts to only 20 or 30 million years, animal life diversified into an array of forms that seem at times more alien than familiar. New body plans, hard parts, and complex sensory systems turned once stable ecosystems into competitive arenas where survival demanded speed, defense, and ingenuity. Among the most memorable fossils are trilobites, armored arthropods that left abundant trails across ancient sediment and would persist for hundreds of millions of years. They share their world with creatures like Hallucigenia, its upright spines resembling a defensive barricade, and Anomalocaris, a meter-long predator equipped with grasping appendages and a mouth lined with plates, an apex hunter of its day. These organisms capture how quickly morphology expanded beyond the simple templates of earlier life. For the first time, ecosystems included predators large and active enough to structure entire communities. This surge in form and behavior was not entirely without precedent. New research in 2025 describes trace fossils from about 545 million years ago, slender, bilaterally symmetrical tracks left in shallow sediments. Published in Geology, the study suggests that simple bilaterian animals were already active slightly before the Cambrian explosion fully took hold. This pushes the roots of animal diversification earlier than once thought and shows that some of the groundwork for later complexity was already underway. The Cambrian fossil record itself continues to provide surprises. Classic localities like the Burgess Shale in Canada and Changjiang in China preserve soft-bodied organisms in remarkable detail. But in 2025, another window opened. A Science Advances study described fossils from the Grand Canyon, dating between 507 and 502 million years old. These specimens preserve entire soft-bodied communities, including delicate anatomical features rarely captured. Their discovery emphasizes that extraordinary Cambrian ecosystems were widespread, not just isolated to a few famous outcrops, and it shows how much remains to be uncovered even in well-studied regions. Why did animal life expand so suddenly after languishing for so long? Several ideas converge. Oxygen concentrations had been rising, and recent isotope work using molybdenum and thallium confirmed spikes in available oxygen just before and during the Cambrian. Higher oxygen allowed animals with larger bodies and metabolically demanding tissues, such as muscles and nervous systems, to thrive. At the genetic level, the basic developmental toolkit of Hox's genes was already in place from earlier evolution. These regulatory genes enabled flexible patterning of body segments, appendages, and sensory structures. Once ecological opportunities expanded, this toolkit could be expressed in new ways, producing body plans with shells, eyes, and paired limbs. The third factor was ecological, predator-prey escalation. Once sizable predators appeared, prey evolved armor, spines, and strategies like burrowing or fast swimming, which in turn triggered further predatory adaptations. Together, oxygen availability, latent genetic capacity, and ecological escalation formed a cascade that accelerated evolutionary change beyond its earlier pace. The emergence of eyes was particularly transformative. With sight, predation became precise rather than opportunistic. Fossils preserve some of the earliest compound eyes in trilobites and other arthropods, marking the start of vision-based hunting and defense. This shift altered the evolutionary arms race. Organisms with sharper vision could detect prey or avoid predators earlier, setting off a rapid expansion of both visual organs and behaviors reliant on them. The Cambrian record is filled with experiments. While trilobites became long-lasting evolutionary successes, many strange lineages left no descendants. Hallucigenia, once reconstructed upside down by mistake, and Anomalocaris with its unusual circular mouth are examples of pathways tried and abandoned. Yet even these evolutionary dead ends played roles in shaping their ecosystems, applying selective pressures that influenced survivors. It is important to note, however, that not every modern animal group appeared in Cambrian seas fully formed. Many major groups emerged in a relatively short fossil window, but stem lineages and precursors extend into earlier periods. The explosion marks an intensification of diversification, not a literal single moment of origin for all phyla. Ecosystems themselves became more layered and structured. Shallow seas once dominated by microbial mats now hosted complex food webs. Grazers scoured sediment surfaces, burrowers mixed soils, predators patrolled open water, and scavengers searched for remains. Reefs began to appear in limited form, built from early calcifying organisms. These ecological tiers show life reorganizing into networks far more intricate than those of the Ediacaran period just before. The Cambrian explosion stands out not because of any one organism, but because it represents the establishment of animal architectures that persist today. Segmentation, exoskeletons, jointed limbs, hard shells, complex digestive systems, and nervous systems integrated with eyes and sensory organs all proliferated in this span. Evolution tested shapes and strategies at a pace that redefined limits of possibility. Recent work points to tectonics as an additional backdrop. When continents rifted apart in this interval, shallow seas spread across margins, dispersing nutrients into photic zones where animal life concentrated. Large populations could form, genetic variation increased, and novel traits were more likely to take hold. Combined with oxygen pulses and ecological escalation, these geological settings provided fuel for evolutionary innovation. The brevity of the Cambrian relative to Earth's age makes its effects more striking. In our compressed timeline, it would take only a few minutes, yet within that moment trilobites, early mollusks, annelids, stem arthropods, and early vertebrates laid the groundwork for modern diversity. Life did not transition smoothly or uniformly, but in networks of trial, failure, and success that reshaped the oceans permanently. By the close of the Cambrian, the seas contained reefs, predators of significant size, and prey with armored defenses. Ecological escalation had become perpetual, ensuring that change itself remained constant. Life's experimental phase had produced working templates that would define marine worlds for hundreds of millions of years. What began as a sudden flowering beneath silent seas created the structures from which future giants, forests, and terrestrial ecosystems would emerge. Evolution had gained new tools, new body designs, and a momentum that no geological upheaval could entirely reverse. And while these events unfolded beneath the waves, other transformations prepared to reshape not just oceans but the continents themselves. It was on land that Earth was about to face another profound biological revolution, one that would alter the soil, the atmosphere, and the scale of life in ways no Cambrian predator ever could. The Age of Giants and the Plant Revolution. Life's experiments in the sea had reshaped marine ecosystems, but on land an even more profound change was beginning. The Devonian and Carboniferous periods saw the emergence of forests in the plant revolution, a transformation that altered the planet's surface, atmosphere, and climate in ways no organism had achieved before. Before land plants spread widely, most surfaces were bare rock or thin mats of mosses and lichens clinging to damp edges of streams and lakes. Soil in the modern sense did not exist. That began to change when early vascular plants extended roots into rock. As roots dug downward, fungi partnered with them, breaking down minerals and recycling nutrients, a collaboration that helped generate the first true soils. These soils held water, captured organic matter, and created foundations that vegetation could build upon. For the first time, continents began to host active ecosystems, rather than only sparse green fringes along shorelines. By about 400 million years ago, the first true forests appeared. Plants like Archaeopteris developed woody trunks, some more than 20 meters tall, supported by vascular systems strong enough to transport water and nutrients up to their crowns. They dropped leaves and branches, which decayed into soils, feeding nutrient cycles and locking carbon into the ground. This marked the beginning of a planetary redesign of carbon movement. No longer was carbon exchanged mainly between oceans and air, it was now buried long-term on land. The climate responded sharply. As plants rooted across entire continents, they accelerated chemical weathering of rocks. Carbon dioxide was pulled from the air and locked into soils and sediments. With less greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, heat trapped around the planet lessened. The cooling reached the point that ice sheets expanded repeatedly. The sequence is clear: plants formed soils, carbon was buried, greenhouse gases fell, and the Earth cooled, though the story was not simple. Plant-driven changes worked alongside tectonics and ocean chemistry, and their combined feedbacks produced glacial intervals that reshaped coastlines. Forests also transformed landscapes. Roots stabilized riverbanks, slowing erosion and creating more permanent channels. Sediment that once washed freely into oceans became trapped on land, changing coastal ecologies. River valleys gained enduring soils, and for the first time animal life had shaded habitats to follow along streams and lakes. These dense environments introduced complexity above and below ground. Leaf litter provided food for insects, fungi traded nutrients with plant roots, and amphibians adapted to exploit shaded, humid margins. Life was learning to operate within layered ecosystems, where light, temperature, and community varied from canopy to forest floor. But forests were not just beneficial. Their expansion caused disruption too. Nutrients flushed into coastal waters fueled huge algal blooms that stripped oxygen from shallow seas, leading to local die-offs. Several late Devonian extinction events are linked to such feedbacks. On global scales, recurrent cooling events stressed marine groups, including corals and trilobites. Life on land had become powerful enough to trigger upheaval in the oceans, showing just how tightly planetary systems had become connected. Despite these crises, forests spread across whole continents. Amphibians, descended from lobe-finned fish, evolved legs and lungs suited for tangled swamp margins. Their early steps onto land marked the beginning of vertebrate colonization of terrestrial environments. Insects also seized the opportunities presented by new habitats. By the Carboniferous, higher oxygen levels supported giant forms. Dragonflies with wingspans over 2 feet wide soared over wetlands, enabled by air richer in oxygen than today. The forests of this time created new geologic legacies. Vast swamp systems at low latitudes produced immense coal deposits. Layers of buried vegetation accumulated cycle after cycle as forests grew, collapsed, and regrew. Each burial event drew down additional carbon dioxide, contributing to further global cooling. These processes left behind the coal seem still mined today, records of ancient plants not only alive in their time, but also altering Earth's atmosphere and locking energy underground for hundreds of millions of years. The relationship between plants and fungi deepened the revolution. Early plants first struggled to break down the tough compounds, lignin and cellulose, building up in their own tissues. Fungi adapted to decompose these materials, recycling nutrients back into soil. Without this fungal partnership, dead biomass would have accumulated intact, choking ecosystems under layers of undecayed wood. Instead, decomposition completed the nutrient cycle, creating fertile soils and sustaining the growth of new forests. Forests also brought the invention of shade. Before tree canopies rose, sunlight fell without obstruction across land surfaces. Now, different light levels created distinct ecological zones. Some species adapted to live in sunny canopies, others thrived in perpetual dimness at the forest floor. Amphibians prowled swampy shadows, insects wove through layers of vegetation, and microbial communities differed between root zones and exposed clearings. Life now inhabited a vertically stratified world, competing and cooperating across multiple layers of habitat. Tectonics and plant growth together reshaped the geology of continents. Roots reinforced banks, delaying floods but also forcing rivers to carve deeper channels. Mineral-rich soils influenced water chemistry, carrying elements into oceans in new ratios. Limestone deposits shifted in composition as the balance between dissolved carbon and carbonate shells changed. Coal, shale, and limestones of this era preserve evidence of plants introducing geology into the biosphere's feedback system, cycling atmosphere, climate, and continents together. The Devonian and Carboniferous saw extinctions alongside innovation. Coral reefs collapsed under stressed climates, trilobites and other marine animals declined. On land, amphibians diversified but faced competition as climates shifted, while plant groups themselves evolved new adaptations to dominate different environments. Through all this, forests remained resilient. Even when species fell, the plant ecosystems as a whole continued spreading, always returning after each glacial advance or ecological disruption. Over tens of millions of years, these changes define what historians call the Age of Giants, not only because of towering trees, but because of oversized amphibians and insects thriving in oxygen-rich swamps. The scale of life in this period far exceeded what had come before. For the first time, land overtook seas as a driver of planetary change. By capturing and burying carbon, forests gained influence over climate itself. By building soils, they established systems that would support future ecosystems, from reptiles to mammals. They were architects of landscapes, structuring environments that steered the course of evolution. Forests left the continents permanently changed. Land, once barren, was green with layers of life. Climate patterns now incorporated the cycles of vegetation. Animals found new opportunities and new limits within shaded, oxygen-rich ecosystems. What plants created in this time set the stage for every terrestrial system that followed up to and including the conditions that would one day support humans. But dominance never guaranteed permanence. In later ages, planetary forces tested even the most established ecosystems. Volcanic upheavals, rifting continents, and sudden global catastrophes placed immense pressure on the living world. These forces would not erase what plants had built, but they would redirect the future of evolution in dramatic ways. And it is against this backdrop of global transformation that the next great test of life unfolded. Dinosaurs, volcanoes, and a cosmic bad day. Before the asteroid carved its mark, dinosaurs had already endured one of Earth's most unstable stages. Their world was often shaped by enormous volcanic episodes, where continents rifted apart and lava spilled over areas the size of modern countries. During the Triassic and Jurassic, such eruptions created vast igneous provinces, records of basalt flows that stretch for thousands of kilometers. These events did not unfold as single cataclysms, but in repeated pulses lasting hundreds of thousands of years. Each pulse expelled immense amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the air, driving the climate between sudden bouts of warming and short volcanic winters. It was an unreliable backdrop, hostile to many animal groups, but dinosaurs proved unusually equipped to persist under such swings. The Triassic, beginning more than 200 million years ago, opened with continents still recovering from the end Permian extinction, the most devastating loss of life Earth ever recorded. Many reptile and amphibian lineages had only just begun to reappear when the first dinosaurs entered the scene. Small and lightly built early species competed with crocodile-like archosaurs and the earliest mammals, yet the planetary instability favored them. Their upright posture allowed fast and efficient locomotion. Their lungs and skeletons supported higher activity in stressed conditions. Where climates altered abruptly, they could adapt quickly and keep expanding. At the same time, Earth's crust was undergoing massive rearrangement. The single landmass of Pangaea began splitting. Faults deepened, rift valleys broke apart, and lava flooded across continental interiors. As these continental blocks moved away from one another, shallow seaways formed, dividing ecosystems and introducing climatic gradients. Some areas became arid interiors, others humid coasts sustained by the new circulation patterns. Dinosaurs radiated into both. Long-necked sauropods evolved to exploit tall, woody plants, while swift carnivores filled niches as apex hunters. Where other groups struggled with abrupt shifts, dinosaurs seemed to find opportunity in instability. Jurassic deposits showcase the scale of their success. In western North America, the Morrison Formation records giant herbivores Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and Brachiosaurus feeding among cycads and conifers. Nearby, predators like Allosaurus stalked prey far larger than themselves. These animals lived in environments marked by rivers, floodplains, and dry intervals. Their ability to thrive in both abundance and scarcity made them resilient, even as volcanic activity continued reshaping landscapes. The Jurassic biosphere demonstrates just how firmly dinosaurs rooted themselves in terrestrial ecosystems. By the Cretaceous, beginning around 145 million years ago, evolutionary experiments intensified. Flowering plants spread across continents, adding new food resources. Dinosaurs kept pace through innovation. Hadrosaurs developed elaborate arrangements of grinding teeth to handle tough vegetation, while horned ceratopsians grew striking frills and horns that worked as defenses, social signals, or both. Even giant sauropods continued, with species like Argentinosaurus reaching lengths beyond 30 meters and weights measured in dozens of tons. These were among the largest animals ever to walk on land, evidence that dinosaur physiology allowed extremes unmatched by other vertebrates. Throughout their reign, volcanic activity remained a recurring stress. Geologists link some eruptions to localized crises, though not all proved fatal. The Siberian traps had devastated ecosystems long before at the Permian event. Later, the Deccan traps in India erupted both before and after the Cretaceous extinction. These immense lava fields stretch for hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, evidence of Earth's deep processes reshaping surface life. Dinosaurs persisted through much of this turmoil, but the final blow came not from below but from space. 66 million years ago, a roughly 10-kilometer-wide asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula. In an instant, it released energy so vast that it equaled billions of nuclear detonations. The impact excavated the Chicxulub crater, more than 180 kilometers across, and vaporized carbonate-rich rocks, hurling sulfur, dust, and molten debris high into the atmosphere. The strike ignited fires regionally, sent tsunamis racing across seas, and wrapped the planet in airborne particles. Forests burned, skies darkened, and global conditions deteriorated within days. The immediate consequences unfolded quickly. Firestorms, towering waves, and atmospheric debris were followed by months where sunlight barely reached the ground. Plant photosynthesis faltered, marine plankton crashed, and ecosystems reliant on these primary producers collapsed in chain reactions. Cooling gripped the planet. Older models suggested catastrophic temperature plunges, though recent 2025 work recalculates sulfur release at about 67 plus or minus 39 gigatons, lower than earlier estimates. This implies the cooling, while severe, may not have been as protracted or absolute as once thought. Even so, sudden disruption proved too much for ecosystems engineered around stable light and productivity. Herbivorous dinosaurs suffered first, their food base erased under the dark sky. Predators starved soon after. Ammonites, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and other marine specialists also vanished. Within a geologically brief interval, every lineage of non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. Only small feathered forms able to fly, early birds, persisted. Important fossil layers at this boundary are rich in iridium, a signature element from meteorites, confirming the extraterrestrial origin of this devastation. Some scientists once argued dinosaurs were already in decline before the impact, based on fossil counts toward the end of the Cretaceous. But a 2025 study from University College London showed that much of this apparent decline may reflect sampling bias rather than real collapse. Ecosystems remained robust right up to the impact itself. This strengthens the conclusion that the asteroid, rather than gradual weakening, was the decisive global trigger of extinction. Volcanism in the Deccan traps aggravated climates with gases and warmed some regions, but the Chicxulub strike produced the sharp boundary event preserved worldwide. Recovery began sooner than long assumed. 2025 research shows that hydrothermal systems within the Chicxulub crater circulated water and nutrients, allowing microbial life to flourish again locally within years. Even in devastation, new habitats emerged. As dust settled and skies cleared, plants recolonized and animal groups diversified into the vacated niches. Mammals, long overshadowed by giant reptiles, survived because of traits suited to lean times, small bodies, flexible diets, and rapid breeding. These advantages turned survival into expansion once ecological space opened. Birds, inheriting the dinosaurian legacy, diversified into numerous roles across land and sea. The end of the Cretaceous demonstrates a rule that repeats through Earth's past. Resilience is not evenly shared. Dinosaurs adapted so well to millions of years of volcanism and shifting continents could not adjust to abrupt global darkness. Their extinction was catastrophic to them but also reset ecological systems, giving space for alternative lineages. Mammals moved into roles left vacant by giant reptiles, and from these beginnings, new evolutionary experiments took shape. In Earth's compressed history, dinosaurs ruled little more than a few minutes. They expanded across every continent, dominated ecosystems through repeated volcanic episodes, weathered gradual planetary changes, and still perished when a single external event proved overwhelming. Yet their disappearance opened paths for others, setting the stage for a very different future. In the recovery that followed, long-suppressed lineages began their rise, and one in particular would eventually cast its influence across the planet. Mammals in waiting, humans in a blink. If the age of reptiles closed with an impact, what followed was the quiet rise of mammals. In a story measured against 4.5 billion years, our species arrived astonishingly late. Homo sapiens emerged only about 300,000 years ago, while recorded civilizations began scarcely 10,000 years ago. Framed this way, human history occupies less than an instant of geologic time, yet within that moment its effects have been immense. In the aftermath of the asteroid 66 million years ago, the largest creatures were gone and the stage lay open. Mammals had survived in burrows and sheltered niches, subsisting on seeds, insects, and whatever else they could find. Their small size, rapid reproduction, and flexible diets proved decisive advantages. The extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs became the beginning of a new story. At first, mammals were inconspicuous. Most were nocturnal and weighed no more than a housecat. But these modest survivors had traits that gave them remarkable potential. They were warm-blooded, covered in fur, and equipped with versatile teeth that could handle varied foods. Within a few million years, mammals expanded into habitats left empty: water, forest canopy, grasslands, and their diversity flourished. Fossil records show new branches appearing rapidly, the forerunners of today's rodents, carnivores, and hoofed animals. Where reptiles had once ruled, mammals became the central actors in reshaping ecosystems. Among them, primates stood out as a lineage tied closely to forests. Fossils from the Paleocene and Eocene epochs reveal small arboreal species with grasping hands, stereoscopic vision, and adaptations for leaping among branches. Social behaviors and reliance on sight began here long before humans were imaginable. Over tens of millions of years, primates radiated into many forms: lemur-like lineages, early monkeys, and ancestors that would one day give rise to apes. Mammalian expansion never followed a straight path. Ice ages came and went. Continents shifted, mountain chains rose, and forests alternated with savannas. Populations grew and dwindled depending on climate swings. Many large mammals flourished only to vanish when conditions turned. Evolution was not a march toward humanity, but more like a thicket of branching paths. New fossil discoveries, such as the Ledijeraru jaw from Ethiopia, highlight how complex and bushy this evolutionary tree really was. Multiple ancestral lineages coexisted, interacting with and even interbreeding with one another. Around 6 million years ago, one lineage in Africa began separating from its closest relatives. As savannas expanded, some apes adapted to walking upright. Fossils show subtle shifts in hips, knees, and spinal alignment that supported bipedal motion. Upright stance offered advantages: the ability to scan open landscapes, to carry food or infants more efficiently, and to free the hands for tool use. It was not dominance, but it was a turning point. Over the next few million years, hominins diverged into many species. Some were small-brained bipeds, others larger with adaptations to chewing tough vegetation. Stone flakes appear in the record by about 2.6 million years ago, evidence for deliberate shaping of tools. Then around 2 million years ago, Homo erectus emerged. With larger brains, longer legs, and the ability to walk great distances, they spread widely, leaving Africa and reaching Asia and Europe. Evidence of fire and more sophisticated tools marks them as a pivotal species, though again they were not our only ancestors. The genus Homo was diverse. Even relatively recently, species overlapped. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans farther east, and small-bodied Homo floresiensis in Indonesia are just a few examples. Genetic evidence confirms that these lineages were not fully separate. Ancient DNA reveals clear episodes of interbreeding. Many modern humans today carry Neanderthal and Denisovan genetic traces, showing that our species emerged from a web of coexistence rather than a single isolated origin. Homo sapiens appeared about 300,000 years ago, carrying traits that distinguished us from earlier hominins: lighter skeletons, rounded skulls, and a brain well adapted to symbolic thought. Cave art, ornaments, and early musical instruments demonstrate a level of creativity and abstraction that went beyond pure survival. Yet at first, we were not alone. Neanderthals and Denisovans persisted, each with their own specialized cultures and technologies. Eventually, through a combination of competition, climate stress, and interbreeding, those relatives disappeared, leaving our species as the last human lineage standing. The environment of the past 2.5 million years tested all life with cycles of glaciation. Enormous ice sheets advanced and retreated, sometimes within tens of thousands of years. Large mammals like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats thrived for a time but were vulnerable to climate swings. Humans, by contrast, relied on adaptability. Flexible diets, cooperative groups, and tool innovation allowed us to thrive through these cycles where many specialists went extinct. By roughly 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began a wave of migrations out of Africa. In astonishingly short geological time, humans reached Asia, Australia, Europe, and eventually the Americas. Archaeological and genetic records trace these migrations, showing how rapidly our species spread across the globe, replacing or mixing with earlier lineages wherever we went. The shift to agriculture about 10,000 years ago marked another turning point. Settled farming communities allowed food surpluses, denser populations, and permanent settlements. From there arose written languages, cities, and organized states. The scale is startling when placed in Earth's history. Agriculture occupies 1/6 of a second in the 1-hour clock of the planet. Written records take up only a few thousand years, too small to show against the immensity of what came before. Industry, global society, and modern technology are new enough to barely register in geological terms. Yet in that blink, humans have altered the course of Earth's surface, rivers, atmosphere, and climate. We reroute waterways, extract minerals at planetary scales, and add human-made materials that will persist in future strata. Plastic, concrete, and altered isotopes are now part of the rock record, as lasting as stromatolites or coal seems in earlier ages. Placed against the backdrop of the dinosaurs, 150 million year reign or microbes billions in dominance, our tenure is astonishingly short. We have lived through only a single sliver of Earth's day. Still, we are the first species aware of that span and capable of reflecting on it. That perspective makes one truth clear: adaptation has carried us this far, but survival is never guaranteed. Earth's history is marked by fire, ice, impacts, and extinctions, and we have arrived only at the latest chapter. In the 1-hour clock of Earth, humanity is not longer than a blink, but within that blink, we have reshaped the surface of the planet. The record of what happens next is being written now. Across 4.5 billion years, Earth has endured bombardments, global freezes, volcanic upheavals, and impacts from space. Each upheaval left survivors that transformed the planet, from microbes forging oxygen to forests burying carbon, until eventually humans appeared in a moment so brief it barely registers on deep time scale. The same feedbacks that once reshaped Earth, vegetation, ice, volcanic gases, can now be tipped by human activity. Our choices will influence how this short chapter is preserved in the planet's future record. To see that immensity yourself, stay and watch the timeline unfold, and let us know which ancient moment surprised you most.